Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm Margaret, and here I share real-life stories from my friends at the nursing home. The day my mother's will was read, I sat in that beige, airless lawyer's office and felt my chest cave in like someone had kicked me. It wasn't the grief. That had been chewing me hollow for weeks, since the night I sat by her hospital bed and held her hand through her last shallow breaths. No, this was something sharper. It was betrayal dressed up in legal language. Jessica, my younger sister, had been given my mother's downtown condo, the one with the brick balcony overlooking the river, the condo my mother and I had sanded floors in together when I was 23, breathing in the scent of fresh varnish and dreaming aloud about hosting Christmas dinners there someday. Me. I was left my mother's personal winter coat of sentimental value. A coat. The lawyer, a thin man named Hensley, who kept clearing his throat like he wanted to apologize but couldn't, read the words without blinking. Jessica sat across from me, her legs crossed in a way that showed off her perfect calf muscles, the kind you get from Pilates and an easy life. She was wearing lipstick that matched the blood-red leather of her bag, and she didn't meet my eyes once. Ryan, my husband, was next to me. His hand rested on my knee, like he thought I might make a scene. I didn't. I sat still, my fingers digging into my palm, staring at the grain in the conference table. "This can't be right," I said finally, my voice so flat it didn't even sound like mine. "It's all signed, witnessed, and notarized," Hensley replied, avoiding my gaze. "This is the last will and testament on file." Jessica tilted her head, her voice dripping false sympathy. Mum always wanted me to have the condo. You've got Ryan, the house, your own life. I live downtown. It makes sense." I wanted to tell her that nothing about this made sense. That Mom and I had sat on that balcony last summer, eating strawberries and talking about how I would move in there one day when the mortgage on our suburban place was paid off. But my mouth stayed shut. Ryan squeezed my knee. It wasn't comfort. It was a warning. 2 days later, after the funeral flowers had wilted and the casserole dishes from well-meaning neighbors had been returned, I went to Mom's apartment to pick up the coat. It hung alone in the hallway closet, thick wool, deep charcoal, with a fur-trimmed collar worn soft by years of winter wear. I remembered her in it when I was little, standing at the bus stop with her gloved hands shoved into the pockets, her cheeks pink in the cold. I pressed it to my face and breathed in. It still smelled faintly of her, a mix of lavender soap and the sharp sweetness of peppermint gum. When I brought it home, Ryan barely looked up from his phone. "That's it?" he asked. "That's what you got?" "Yeah," I said, hanging it carefully in our front closet. He smirked. "Well, it's better than nothing. Jess probably needs that condo more than we do anyway." The casual way he said her name made something in my stomach twist. It was a week later when I found the letter. I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, when I remembered I hadn't checked the coat's pockets. I went to the closet, slipped my hands inside, nothing but smooth lining. But when I pressed my fingers against the seam, I felt it. A small, hard edge, like paper hidden beneath the stitches. My hands shook as I carried it to the dining table. I got the sewing scissors from the drawer and carefully picked at the thread until a narrow opening appeared. Inside was a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. My name, Emily, was written in Mum's cursive. I sat down before I opened it. "My darling Emily, if you're reading this, it means I've gone, and something has gone wrong. The condo is yours. It was always meant to be yours. I signed the will, leaving it to you. If it says otherwise now, Someone has tampered with it. I need you to call Margaret Lane. She was my attorney before she retired, and she knows the truth. I trust her with my life. Do not confront anyone without speaking to her first. With all my love, Mom. I read it 3 times, the words blurring and sharpening. The kettle whistled in the kitchen until the water boiled away. When I finally looked up, Ryan was standing in the doorway, his eyes flicking to the envelope. "What's that?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, folding it quickly and slipping it into my robe pocket. My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. Margaret lived in a small brick bungalow at the edge of town, the kind with lace curtains and a mailbox shaped like a tiny red barn. She was in her 70s, with sharp blue eyes and silver hair cut in a neat bob. When I showed her the letter, she sat very still, then let out a low whistle. "I drew up a will for your mother 3 years ago," she said. "In it, you were the sole heir to the condo. She was clear about that. If this new will says otherwise, someone forged it or replaced it." I told her about Jessica, about Ryan's strange calmness when the will was read. Margaret's gaze didn't waver. "Emily," she said quietly, "do you trust your husband?" I wanted to say yes. Instead, I stared at the floor. Margaret leaned back, tapping her fingers on the arm of her chair. "Forgery and fraud leave traces, bank records, computer metadata. We can find them. But you'll have to be careful. If your husband's involved, you can't tip your hand." At home, I started watching. Ryan had been working late more often, claiming client dinners. Jessica posted photos on Instagram, wine glasses clinking over candlelight, city views from a condo balcony. My condo's balcony. One night, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. The passcode was the same as it had always been, our anniversary. There it was. Text messages from Jessica, hidden under a contact name labeled JP. JP. "Miss you already. Condo's even better without her in the picture." Ryan. "Just a little longer. Once the sale's through, we're golden." I felt my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't just the affair, it was that they were planning to sell the condo. That night, lying in bed beside him, I kept my eyes closed and my breathing even. Inside, a quiet, solid thing was forming. This wasn't going to be a screaming match in the kitchen. It wasn't going to be me packing a bag and leaving. It was going to be deliberate, documented, and final. Over tea at Margaret's a few days later, we laid out steps. Secure evidence, screenshots, bank statements, proof of their communications. Get a copy of the new will from Hensley's office. Compare it to the original Margaret still had in her files. Involve a forensic document examiner to confirm forgery. File a petition in probate court to challenge the will. Margaret knew a private investigator who owed her a favor. His name was Tom McKee, ex-cop, the kind who spoke little and noticed everything. The first time I met Tom, he wore a faded leather jacket and carried a camera in a scuffed case. He looked at the letter from my mother, then at me. "You want this done quiet?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "They can't know I'm on to them." He nodded once. "Then we play the long game." In the weeks that followed, my life became a strange split screen. On one side, the ordinary routines, making coffee, going to work at the library, folding laundry. On the other, the secret work of gathering every breadcrumb they'd left behind. Tom trailed Jessica to a bank downtown, photographing her as she deposited a cashier's check. Margaret filed discreet requests for document copies. I kept my face calm when Ryan talked about maybe renovating our kitchen, knowing full well he was waiting for condo money to come through. And then, one rainy Thursday evening, Tom slid a folder across Margaret's dining table. "You're not going to like this," he said. Inside were photos. Ryan and Jessica, together, in my condo's living room, laughing over wine. Her in one of my mother's scarves. The quiet thing inside me didn't break. It hardened. The rain that night had been steady, soft enough to blur the streetlights, but loud enough to fill the silence in my car as I sat outside Margaret's house with that folder on my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. I just stared at their faces in those photographs. Every laugh line and stolen glance caught in perfect clarity, and thought about the nights I'd waited at home, cooking dinner that went cold, while Ryan texted that he was stuck in traffic. My mother's condo had become their love nest. The air I'd once breathed on that balcony now held the scent of their wine and their betrayal. When I stepped inside, Margaret was waiting at the table with tea. She didn't push, didn't ask if I was all right. She simply said, "We've got enough to move forward, but if we press too soon, they'll see us coming. Timing is everything." I nodded, because she was right. I wanted them blindsided, not just exposed. I wanted the moment when the truth hit to be something they couldn't wiggle out of. No misunderstanding they could spin to save themselves. Over the next month, my days became an act. In the morning, I made Ryan coffee the way he liked it, strong, black, 1 sugar, and listened to him complain about city parking as if I didn't know exactly where he'd been the night before. I went to work, smiled at the regulars who came into the library, stamped their books, gave directions to the bathroom. At night, I lay in bed with my back to him, counting his breaths and thinking about my mother's neat handwriting on that letter. Some nights, I pressed my fingers to the hidden pocket in the coat just to remind myself it was real. Tom kept sending updates. Bank transfers from an account I didn't know Ryan had, moving money into Jessica's. Digital metadata showing the new will had been typed on Jessica's laptop, the very same model she used to post her polished little Instagram photos. A handwriting expert compared Mum's signature on the new will with older documents and declared it a textbook forgery. Margaret was building the case like a fortress. No gaps, no weak spots, nothing they could dismantle. Then, one Saturday afternoon, Ryan suggested we go see the condo. I almost laughed, but I said yes. He drove us downtown, parked in the space I used to pull into with Mom, and unlocked the door with a key that should have been mine. Inside, it was exactly as Tom's photos had shown. Jessica's touch everywhere. White silk curtains where Mom had heavy drapes, glass coffee table instead of the oak one we'd carried up 3 flights of stairs together. On the balcony, I could still see the marks in the brick where Mom and I had hung fairy lights for my 30th birthday. I ran my hand over the railing, hiding my expression. Jessica appeared from the hallway, all surprised smiles. "Emily, what a surprise." She kissed my cheek like we were still sisters. I could smell her perfume, something expensive and honey-sweet. Ryan wandered into the kitchen, pouring himself a drink, acting like a man in his own home. I stayed no more than 15 minutes, enough to keep the mask in place. On the drive home, Ryan talked about how maybe one day we could get a place like that for ourselves. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, nodding at the right times, my mind already moving pieces into place. 2 weeks later, Margaret filed the petition to challenge the will. The court date was set for late spring. Until then, we stayed quiet. We didn't want them shifting assets, destroying documents, or inventing a story. In the meantime, I began quietly preparing for the other part of my plan, the one that didn't just restore what was mine, but stripped away everything they'd built on lies. Ryan didn't notice when I began photographing our household bills, his pay stubs, the credit card statements he left on the desk. He didn't ask why I'd started locking my phone. He certainly didn't see me at the bank, opening my own account in my own name, transferring small amounts of money over weeks so it wouldn't draw attention. Jessica had her schemes. I had mine. The day before the hearing, Ryan came home with takeout and a bottle of wine. He was all charm, asking about my day, making jokes, even kissing my forehead when I passed him the plates. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have thought he was trying to make things right. But I'd read his messages that morning. He'd told Jessica, "Tomorrow it's all official. We'll be done with her for good." I smiled over dinner and asked him if he'd like another glass. The courthouse was old, the kind with creaking benches and sunlight slanting through tall windows. Margaret sat beside me, her notes stacked neatly. Across the aisle, Ryan and Jessica whispered to their attorney, a sleek man in a navy suit who kept checking his watch. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. Margaret laid it out methodically, the original will from her files. The letter from my mother, authenticated by a handwriting expert. The metadata from Jessica's laptop, the forged signature, the bank transfers, the photographs. Every piece of it slid into place like a puzzle that only had one possible picture at the end. When the judge turned to Ryan and Jessica's lawyer, he could only mutter something about miscommunication and unverified claims. It didn't matter. The damage was done. When the ruling came, it was swift. The condo was legally mine. The forged will was void. Further, the matter was referred to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. I didn't look at Jessica. I didn't look at Ryan. I simply thanked the judge, gathered my papers, and walked out into the bright afternoon light. That night, I slept in the condo, alone. The air was different now, lighter, like the walls themselves were relieved. I opened the balcony doors, let the city sounds drift in, and hung my mother's coat on a hook by the door. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace, but I wasn't finished. Peace has a strange weight when it first arrives after months of war. That night in the condo, I sat on the living room floor with a cup of tea, staring at the skyline. It felt almost wrong to be here without Mom, but also right in a way that made my chest ache. Her books were still on the shelves, her favorite mug still in the cupboard. I could almost hear her voice telling me not to let anyone take from me what she'd worked to give. I thought of Ryan and Jessica, somewhere in the city, maybe together, maybe each in their own corners, licking their wounds, and knew I wasn't finished. Winning the condo was justice for my mother. What I was about to do next was justice for me. The morning after the ruling, I drove back to the suburban house. Ryan was in the kitchen, hunched over his laptop, wearing the old sweatshirt he'd had since college. He looked up, smiled faintly, like nothing had changed. "Hey, you're up early," he said. "How was your first night in the palace?" I didn't answer the bait. I told him I'd come for some of my things. He shrugged and went back to typing. I moved through the house with quiet precision, taking only what was mine: clothes, books, a few framed photos of Mum and me. My heart rate never spiked, my hands never shook. I left his things untouched, because I knew what I was leaving him with was far heavier than anything I could pack. A week later, the DA's office formally charged Jessica and Ryan with fraud and forgery. They were released pending trial, but their passports were confiscated. Ryan's job put him on administrative leave when the news broke, a polite corporate way of saying they were cutting him loose. Jessica's friends began to drop away, the invitations to her rooftop wine nights drying up overnight. They'd wanted to stand on my mother's balcony and toast their good fortune. Now the only balcony they could see was the courthouse's concrete steps. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly meeting with my divorce lawyer. Every detail was already lined up: the hidden bank account, the transfers, the texts. There would be no drawn-out battle, no desperate negotiations. I filed on a Monday morning, and by Thursday, Ryan was served at his temporary apartment, a dingy one-bedroom in a building I wouldn't have stepped into alone after dark. Tom had told me, with a hint of dry amusement, that Ryan had been renting it under a friend's name to avoid the press. I suppose there are only so many doors you can close before you end up standing in a hallway with nowhere left to go. He called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was sharp at first. "You think you can just walk away from everything we built?" Then softer, almost pleading, "We can work this out, Em." I deleted the message. I had no interest in working out anything with a man who'd stood by while my mother's wishes were buried under lies, who'd shared her home with my sister in the shadows. Jessica tried too. A text, 2 days later. "I never meant for it to go this far. Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I knew she didn't want reconciliation. She wanted rescue. I wasn't in that business anymore. With the condo fully mine, I began making it my own. I kept some of Mum's pieces: the oak table we'd eaten countless meals at, the armchair where she'd read on winter afternoons. But I replaced the cold, impersonal touches Jessica had added. Warm rugs, soft lighting, the smell of fresh paint covering the sterile white walls. Every change felt like reclaiming a little more space in my life. Sometimes I'd pause in the middle of hanging a picture or unpacking books and catch myself smiling without even meaning to. By early summer, the divorce was finalized. Ryan got nothing from me. Not the house, not a settlement, not even the satisfaction of an argument. The charges against him and Jessica were still winding their way through the court, but their worlds had already shrunk to the size of their own making. The last time I saw either of them was at a preliminary hearing. They sat 2 rows ahead, side by side, but not touching. The distance between them was almost as wide as the one they'd put between themselves and everyone who had once trusted them. When the hearing adjourned, I walked past them without a glance. Outside, the sun was warm, the city alive with people who didn't know and didn't care about the small war I'd fought and won. It felt good to be anonymous again, to have my life belong only to me. One evening, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, looking out at the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, and for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a narrowing corridor. It felt open. The coat hung on its hook by the door, just within reach. I ran my fingers along the collar, feeling the soft fur, and thought about the secret pocket that had started it all. My mother had known me well enough to leave me not just a home, but the means to fight for it. And I had fought, not with shouting or bitterness, but with patience, precision, and the knowledge that the truth has a way of surfacing when you refuse to let it sink. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I belonged. The first autumn in the condo arrived slowly, the air cooling day by day until the mornings carried that sharp edge that made you want to wrap your hands around a hot mug. I'd open the balcony doors and let the breeze sweep through the rooms, carrying away the last traces of the life that had been here before. I'd walk barefoot on the hardwood floors, listening to the sounds of the city waking up: car doors closing, bicycle bells, the hum of voices from the cafe across the street. Every morning felt like a quiet affirmation. I had survived. And more than that, I had rebuilt. The legal case against Jessica and Ryan dragged on for months, but I didn't follow it closely. Margaret would call with updates. Court dates postponed. Their lawyer trying to negotiate some lesser charge, a plea deal hanging in the air. None of it touched me anymore. The fight was over on my end. The rest was just paperwork. I had no desire for revenge beyond what I'd already achieved. Seeing them stripped of the power they'd once held over me was enough. What the justice system decided to do with them was its own business. I focused instead on filling my days with new things. I signed up for a painting class at a small art studio downtown. I started going for long walks by the river after dinner, watching the water shift colors as the sun sank behind the buildings. I made friends in the building, real friends, the kind who knocked on your door with a plate of cookies just because, or invited you over for wine on a rainy night. Slowly, the edges of my life softened. Every now and then, I'd still think about my mother's letter. I'd picture her sitting at the kitchen table, the coat folded neatly beside her, carefully stitching that hidden pocket shut. She must have known it would be my lifeline. Maybe she suspected the betrayal long before I did. Maybe she just knew Jessica's weaknesses and Ryan's charm too well. Whatever her reasons, she'd left me the proof I needed, tucked into something that felt like an embrace every time I put it on. One chilly afternoon in late October, I wore that coat for the first time since everything ended. I slipped it over my shoulders, felt the weight of it settle like a promise kept. Walking through the city streets, I passed the courthouse, an unplanned route, and saw Jessica coming down the steps. She was thinner now, her face sharper, her hair pulled back into a tight bun that made her look older. Our eyes met for a split second. She looked away first. I kept walking without breaking stride. There was nothing to say. We weren't sisters anymore. At home, I hung the coat on its hook and made myself tea. The steam curled upward, catching the golden light pouring in through the kitchen window. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, sitting in that lawyer's office, stunned and humiliated, barely able to breathe under the weight of what I'd been handed. And I thought about the woman I was now, in a home that was truly mine, standing on my own without apology. That night, as I stepped out onto the balcony, the city was glowing. The river caught the light like liquid gold, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke from somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. There would still be hard days, life never promised otherwise. But I'd learned something unshakable. When everything falls apart, you don't have to shatter with it. You can pick through the pieces, keep what's worth keeping, and build something stronger. I raised my glass, not to the past, not even to the victory, but to the quiet, steady life ahead. My mother's coat swayed gently by the door behind me, and I smiled. Some inheritances aren't about money or property. Some are about courage, and the reminder that you can claim what's yours without becoming what hurt you. And this life, here and now, was mine, completely.